The Constitution of India is set up in a way that divides powers among different levels of government, creating a federal system. This means that both the national government, or centre, and the individual state governments hold certain powers. These powers include making laws, legislative powers, enforcing laws, executive powers, and managing financial matters, financial powers. However, when it comes to the judicial or court system, things are a bit different. The Constitution has created a unified judicial system that is responsible for enforcing laws from both the centre and the states. In this federal structure, both the national and state governments are powerful in their own areas, but it is crucial that they work well together. For the federal system to work effectively, there needs to be clear communication and cooperation between the centre and the states. This cooperation is emphasized in the provisions laid out in the Constitution, which address how these two levels of government should interact with one another. To better understand the relationship between the centre and the states, we can look at three main areas: legislative relations, administrative relations, and financial relations. Legislative relations are about how the laws are made and who can make them. The Constitution provides a framework that allows both the centre and the states to make laws within their jurisdictions. For example, Article 246 of the Constitution specifies which subjects fall under the centre's legislative power and which ones belong to the states. The Constitution includes three lists in the 7th schedule: the Union list, for centre, the state list, for states, and the concurrent list, both can legislate. The Union list contains subjects on which only the centre can make laws, like defence and foreign affairs, while the state list includes areas like police and public health. The concurrent list covers subjects where both can legislate, such as education and marriage. Administrative relations deal with how the two levels of government manage their responsibilities. The Constitution allows the centre to direct the states in certain circumstances, especially in times of emergency. For instance, Article 355 states that it is the duty of the centre to ensure that the governance of the states is carried out according to the Constitution. Additionally, the centre can also provide guidelines and assistance to states when necessary, fostering cooperation and coordination in administering various programs and services. Financial relations concern how money is raised and spent between the two levels of government. The Constitution addresses this in detail through various articles. For example, Article 280 establishes a finance commission that recommends how the revenue collected by the centre should be distributed between the centre and the states. The Constitution also outlines sources of income for both the centre and the states, such as taxes, duties, and grants, ensuring a fair distribution of resources. In summary, the Constitution of India creates a federal structure that helps distribute powers between the centre and the states. By examining legislative, administrative, and financial relations, we can see the importance of cooperation and structured interaction between different levels of government. Effective functioning of this federal system is vital for maintaining unity and ensuring that governance is responsive to the needs of the people across the country. Legislative relations in India. In India, the relationship between the central government and state governments regarding lawmaking is addressed in Articles 245 to 255 of the Constitution. These articles are part of Part 11, which outlines the powers and responsibilities of both the centre, the central government, and the states. The Indian Constitution divides legislative powers between the two, similar to how many federal systems work around the world. This division is crucial for maintaining the balance of power and ensuring that both levels of government can operate effectively within their own areas of responsibility. There are four important aspects of the legislative relations between the centre and the states. Firstly, the territorial extent of legislation refers to the geographical area in which laws made by the centre or the states apply. the central government can make laws that apply nationally, while state governments make laws that apply within their own territories. This means that a law passed by a state assembly is only valid within that state, while a law passed by parliament can affect the entire country. Secondly, the distribution of legislative subjects outlines which subjects are under the jurisdiction of the centre and which are under the states. This is detailed in the 7th schedule of the Constitution, which has 3 lists: the Union list, subjects only the centre can legislate on; the State list, subjects only the states can legislate on; and the Concurrent list, subjects both can legislate on. For instance, defense and foreign affairs fall under the Union list, while police and agriculture come under the State list. Thirdly, there is parliamentary legislation in the state field. In certain exceptional circumstances, the central government can make laws on subjects that are within the state domain. This can happen when there is a national emergency or when 2 or more states request a joint law on a specific subject. For instance, if there's a serious situation affecting multiple states, such as a natural disaster, the centre might step in to legislate. Finally, there is the centre's control over state legislation. The Constitution allows the central government to have oversight over state laws in specific cases. For example, if a state law goes against the interests of the nation or violates any national laws, the central government can intervene. Articles like 254 allow the centre to disallow state laws that are inconsistent with central laws, especially in matters on the concurrent list. There are provisions for seeking the President's assent for certain state laws as well, adding an additional layer of oversight. In conclusion, the legislative relations between the centre and the states are essential in a country as diverse as India. They ensure that both levels of government can function effectively while maintaining a system of checks and balances. Understanding these relations is key to grasping how laws are made and enforced in India, and it reflects the spirit of cooperative federalism that the Constitution embodies. The interactions between the centre and state legislatures have a significant impact on governance and the functioning of democracy in India. Territorial extent of central and state legislation in India. The Indian Constitution outlines how and where laws can be made by both the central government, parliament, and state governments. This is important because it helps to define who has the authority to legislate and where those laws apply. Firstly, Parliament, which is the legislative body of the central government, has the power to create laws for the entire country or for specific areas within it. This includes all states, union territories, and any other regions defined as part of India's territory. This means that if Parliament passes a law, it applies to all corners of India. On the other hand, state legislatures have the authority to make laws only for their specific states. This means that any law passed by a state legislature won't apply outside its borders unless there's a clear connection or relationship between the law in question and the object it's addressing. This ensures that different states can create laws that reflect their unique needs and circumstances. One of the special powers of Parliament is what is known as extraterritorial legislation. This means that laws created by Parliament can also have effects outside India. For example, if there is a law regarding the behavior of Indian citizens living abroad, that law could still apply to them no matter where they are in the world. However, the Constitution does impose limits on this power. There are specific conditions under which Parliament's laws may not apply. For instance, the President of India can issue regulations for certain union territories, such as the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, Lakshadweep, Dadra and Nagar Haveli, Daman and Diu, and Ladakh. When it comes to Puducherry, the President can also enact laws through regulations, but this can only happen when the local legislative assembly is either suspended or dissolved. Regulations made in this way have the same authority as acts passed by Parliament and can even modify or repeal existing laws. Furthermore, governors of states have specific powers as well. For example, a governor can decide that a certain law passed by Parliament will not apply to specific, scheduled areas within the state or apply with certain modifications. The same authority extends to the governor of Assam, who can choose not to apply a law to a tribal area, known as an autonomous district, in the state. This power is similarly held by the President in relation to tribal areas in states like Meghalaya, Tripura, and Mizoram. The relevant articles of the Indian Constitution regarding these legislative powers include Article 246, which outlines the distribution of powers between the centre and the states, and Article 245, which details the extent of laws made by Parliament and state legislatures. Understanding these frameworks helps clarify how laws are enacted and their reach across diverse regions of India. In summary, the Constitution carefully delineates the scope of legislative powers for both the central and state governments, considering the unique needs of different regions and communities while ensuring a cohesive legal framework throughout the country. Distribution of legislative subjects in India. The Indian Constitution outlines how powers to make laws are divided between the central government, the Parliament, and the state governments. This division is detailed in the 7th schedule of the Constitution and is organized into 3 lists: the Union List, the State List, and the Concurrent List. Union List. The Union List contains matters that are important for the entire country. The Parliament has the exclusive authority to make laws on these subjects. As of now, there are 98 subjects in this list, including areas like national defense, foreign affairs, banking, currency, atomic energy, insurance, and interstate trade. These subjects are essential for maintaining the unity and integrity of the nation. State List. The State List includes matters that are more applicable on a local or regional level. State legislatures have the exclusive power to make laws on these subjects under normal circumstances. This list currently consists of 59 subjects, which encompass public safety, police, public health, agriculture, local governance, and more. These subjects allow state governments to address local needs and issues effectively. Concurrent List. The Concurrent List contains subjects where both the Parliament and state legislatures can make laws. This list has 52 subjects, which includes areas such as criminal law, family planning, labor welfare, and trade. The laws made by the Parliament and state legislatures can overlap in this list. It's important to note that the 42nd Amendment Act of 1976 introduced 5 subjects from the state list into the concurrent list, such as education and forests. Additionally, the Parliament retains the power to legislate on matters that affect union territories, which are regions not included within a state's territory. The 101st Amendment Act of 2016 introduced special provisions regarding the Goods and Services Tax, GST. It allows both the Parliament and state governments to make laws concerning GST. However, the Parliament has exclusive power over GST related to interstate trade. Furthermore, any subjects not mentioned in the Union, State, or concurrent lists fall under the powers of the Parliament. This is known as the residuary power, which also includes powers to levy residuary taxes. This structure ensures that important issues for national governance and uniform laws across the country are under the Union list, while localized matters can be dealt with through the state list. In case of conflicts between laws from different lists, the Constitution has clear rules about which law takes precedence. If there is a conflict between the Union list and state list, the Union law prevails. Likewise, the Union list takes priority when it conflicts with the concurrent list. However, if state law on a concurrent list subject has received the President's approval, that state law will apply. Nevertheless, Parliament can still enact laws that override such state legislation. This framework reflects a compromise between central control and state autonomy, allowing for both national interests and local diversity to be taken into account. It combines elements from other countries. For example, in the US, only federal powers are listed, leaving all other powers to states. Australia follows a similar system, while in Canada, there is a dual enumeration of powers where residuary powers remain with the centre. The Indian Constitution maintains a priority for union laws in overlapping cases, ensuring the central authority can manage national coherence effectively. Understanding these distribution categories and their implications is vital for grasping India's complex governance structure, which aims to balance unity with diversity across its vast landscape. Parliamentary legislation in the state field. In India, the Constitution divides the powers to make laws between the central government, Parliament, and state governments. This division is intended to function smoothly during normal times. However, in situations that are deemed extraordinary, this system can be modified or even suspended. The Constitution allows Parliament to create laws concerning matters that usually fall under the powers of state governments in 5 specific situations. A. When Rajya Sabha passes a resolution. One important scenario is when the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of Parliament, passes a resolution indicating that it is necessary for the national interest to make laws related to goods and services tax or other matters listed under the state list. For this resolution to be valid, it must receive the approval of at least 2/3 of the members who are present and voting. Once passed, the resolution is effective for 1 year but can be renewed indefinitely, provided that each renewal is for a maximum of 1 year. Laws made under this provision will cease to have effect 6 months after the resolution expires. Importantly, this provision does not stop state legislatures from making laws on the same matters. However, if there is a conflict between a law made by Parliament and a state law, the law made by Parliament will take precedence. B. During a national emergency. Another situation occurs during a national emergency, as declared under Article 352 of the Constitution. During such an emergency, Parliament gains the authority to create laws concerning goods and services tax and other subjects listed in the state list. Similar to the Rajya Sabha resolution process, these laws will also stop being valid 6 months after the emergency ends. Again, state legislatures can still make laws on the same subjects, but in case of any disagreement or conflict, the laws made by Parliament will prevail. C. When states make a request. In another instance, if 2 or more states pass resolutions requesting Parliament to make laws on matters that fall under the state list, Parliament can legislate on these topics. Laws enacted in this way are only applicable to the states that passed the resolutions. Other states can also adopt these laws later by passing their own resolutions. However, once Parliament legislates on a matter at the request of the states, the state legislatures lose their power to legislate on that subject. This effectively transfers the power entirely to Parliament. Examples of such laws include the Prize Competition Act of 1955, the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, and the Water, Prevention and Control of Pollution Act of 1974. D. To implement international agreements. Parliament can also legislate on matters in the state list to fulfill India's international obligations, such as treaties or conventions. This provision enables the central government to comply with global commitments. Examples of laws enacted under this provision include the United Nations Privileges and Immunities Act of 1947, the Geneva Convention Act of 1960, and the Anti-Hijacking Act of 1982. These laws ensure that India can meet its international responsibilities efficiently. E. During President's rule. Lastly, When President's rule is imposed in a state, as per Article 356 of the Constitution, Parliament gains the authority to make laws concerning any matter in the state list specific to that state. Notably, such laws remain effective even after the President's rule has ended, and they are not limited to the duration of the President's rule. However, state legislatures can still alter or repeal these laws once the normal legislative process resumes. Conclusion. These provisions within the Indian Constitution allow for flexibility in governance during unusual times, enabling Parliament to step in and legislate on matters typically reserved for states. This ensures that essential governance can continue without interruption, especially during crises or emergencies. Understanding these scenarios is crucial to comprehending how Indian federalism operates and how lawmaking can adapt to the needs of the country at different times. Center's control over state legislation. In India, the relationship between the central government and state governments is complex, especially when it comes to making laws. The Constitution of India grants the central government certain powers to oversee state legislation. This oversight can come into play in various exceptional situations. Here are some key ways in which the center maintains control over state legislative matters. First, the governor of a state has the authority to set aside a bill that has been passed by the state legislature. This bill can be sent to the President for further consideration. It is important to note that the President has complete power to approve or reject this bill, which is known as an absolute veto. This provision falls under Articles 200 and 201 of the Constitution, which allows for this sort of central oversight. Another important aspect is that if a state wants to introduce a bill that restricts the freedom of trade or commerce within that state, it must obtain prior approval from the President before it can be introduced in the state legislature. This requirement is specified in Article 304 of the Constitution, which helps ensure that trade and commerce are not unduly restricted at the state level. Moreover, during situations labeled as a financial emergency, the center has the power to instruct states to keep certain financial bills, like money bills, pending for the President's review. This provision is outlined in Article 360, creating another layer of control over state financial decisions. Additionally, the governor may not have the authority to make ordinances, temporary laws enacted when the legislature is not in session, without first receiving guidance from the President in certain cases. This is covered under Article 213 of the Constitution, which further emphasizes the central authority in legislative affairs. From all the above points, it is clear that the Indian Constitution places the central government in a superior position regarding legislation. This framework is crucial for maintaining order and uniformity in laws across the nation. The Sarkaria Commission, which studied the relationship between the center and states from 1983 to 1988, highlighted the importance of federal supremacy. The Commission stated that having a clear structure for federal powers helps avoid confusion and conflict between the laws made by the union and state governments. This principle of federal supremacy is essential for a well-functioning democratic system in India. It ensures that there is consistency and stability in laws across the states, preventing chaos that could arise from conflicting laws. If this principle were disregarded, it could lead to serious complications, making governance challenging and confusing for citizens. In summary, the mechanisms mentioned above show how the center has the authority to intervene in state legislation, and this is grounded in various articles of the Indian Constitution. This central control aims to maintain harmony and uniformity in law across the diverse states of India. The careful balance between state and central powers is what helps maintain the essence of India's federal structure. Administrative relations in India refer to the interactions and responsibilities between the central government and the state governments. This topic is addressed in Part 11 of the Indian Constitution, specifically in Articles 256 to 263. These articles serve to outline how the central and state governments work together, as well as the powers and duties they hold. Article 256 is the starting point of these provisions, and it states that the states are expected to carry out the laws made by Parliament. This means that any laws enacted by the central government must be followed by state governments. If a state does not comply, the central government has the authority to issue directions. Article 257 provides guidance for the centre's approach to ensuring that state laws are in harmony with national interests. It allows the central government to instruct states to adhere to specific guidelines that can help maintain the unity and integrity of the nation. Article 258 gives the central government the right to take over the powers of the states for certain purposes, but this can only happen if the state government agrees to it. This provision is important for ensuring that the central government has a degree of control in situations that are critical for national welfare. Articles 259 and 260 deal with the appointment of governors in particular situations. This includes provisions when the President of India can direct a governor to carry out responsibilities that would otherwise fall to the state government. Article 261 addresses the importance of mutual recognition of laws between states, ensuring that any legal processes carried out in one state should be accepted in others. This interconnectedness is crucial for ensuring smooth functioning in a federal setup. Article 262 discusses the role of the central government in resolving disputes between states, especially concerning water disputes. It establishes a mechanism through which the centre can intervene to help settle issues that may arise between states. Lastly, Article 263 empowers the President to establish an interstate council to discuss and provide recommendations on matters of common interest between states and the centre, further promoting collaboration and understanding. These articles collectively underscore the importance of cooperative federalism in India, where both the centre and the states are not just separate entities but also partners working for the larger goal of national development and stability. This administrative framework ensures that while states have their own powers, they align with the central authority's objectives, allowing for a well-functioning democratic system. Distribution of executive powers in India. In India, the distribution of executive powers is a crucial aspect of governance and is structured similarly to how legislative powers are divided between the central government and the state governments. This means that both levels of government have specific responsibilities and authorities, which helps maintain a balance of power throughout the country. The executive power of the central government, often referred to as the Union Executive, covers the entire country. It is primarily involved in matters where the Parliament has exclusive power to make laws. These matters are listed in what is called the Union List. This list includes important areas such as defense, foreign affairs, and atomic energy. Besides these legislative powers, the central executive also has the authority to act under any treaty or agreement that India is a part of, meaning it can execute treaties made with other countries. On the other hand, each state in India has its own executive power that is limited to its geographical territory. This state executive handles matters under the state list, which includes areas like police, healthcare, and agriculture, where the state legislature has exclusive power to legislate. Each state can make laws and execute them according to its needs within these matters. Additionally, there are subjects that are shared between the central and state governments, known as the concurrent list. In these cases, both the Parliament and state legislatures can make laws. However, executive power over these subjects primarily rests with the states. If the Parliament makes a law about a subject on the concurrent list, it is usually the responsibility of the state governments to implement it, unless there is a specific provision in the Constitution or a law that gives this responsibility to the central government. The Constitution of India provides clear guidelines for the distribution of powers. Articles 73 and 162 specifically deal with the distribution of executive powers. Article 73 states that the executive power of the Union shall extend to the matters on which Parliament has the power to make laws and also to matters related to the implementation of treaties. Article 162 establishes that the executive power of the states is coextensive with the legislative power of the state assemblies. This distribution system is designed to ensure that both the central and state governments can function effectively while respecting the jurisdiction and powers assigned to each. It also promotes cooperative federalism, allowing both levels of government to work together on matters of mutual importance, thereby improving governance and enhancing the welfare of the people. As a result, understanding this distribution is vital for appreciating how India maintains its unity in diversity, ensuring that local needs and national interests are balanced appropriately. The Constitution of India outlines certain responsibilities for both the central government and the state governments. It aims to ensure a healthy balance between the powers of the states and the centre, especially when it comes to executive authority. The Constitution imposes two key restrictions on the executive power of states to allow the centre to exercise its powers freely and effectively. Firstly, every state must follow the laws created by the Parliament of India, as well as any other existing laws that apply within its territory. This is a general rule intended to ensure that state actions are in line with national legislation. In this way, the states are required to uphold the laws determined at the central level, providing a unified legal framework. Secondly, the states must not obstruct or interfere with the executive powers of the centre. This means that while states have their own powers, they cannot take actions that would undermine or challenge the ability of the central government to perform its duties. This is a specific obligation designed to maintain a clear division of power and responsibilities. In situations where the centre feels that a state is not adhering to these obligations, it has the authority to issue directions to the state. The centre can instruct the state on how to ensure compliance with laws and protect its executive powers. If a state fails to follow these directions, Article 365 of the Constitution comes into play. This article allows the President of India to determine if the situation in the state prevents the state government from functioning according to the Constitution. What this means in simpler terms is that if the President believes a state is not following the law or has problems running its government properly, they can impose what is known as President's Rule under Article 356. This rule allows the President to take control of the state's administration, effectively sidelining the temporary elected government. This measure is seen as a last resort to restore constitutional order in the state. Understanding these articles, Article 365 and Article 356, is critical because they establish a framework for how state and central relationships should function in India. They highlight the centre's authority to intervene when necessary while also outlining the responsibilities states hold to maintain compliance with national laws. This structure is designed to ensure the unity and integrity of the governance system in India's federal framework. Centre's directions to the states. In India, the central government holds the authority to guide the state governments on specific topics, which helps maintain harmony and ensure national priorities are met. Article 256 of the Indian Constitution empowers the centre to issue directions to the states regarding the exercise of their executive powers. This means that the central government can intervene in state matters when necessary, especially when it comes to issues that have national significance or that cannot be effectively handled at the state level alone. There are a few important areas where the centre can direct the states to take certain actions. First, the central government can issue instructions for the building and upkeep of communication facilities, such as roads and bridges, that are considered important for national security or military purposes. This could include highways that connect major cities or strategic routes that allow for the movement of defense personnel and equipment. Second, the center can instruct states on how to protect railways within their boundaries. Railways are crucial for transportation and trade in India, and ensuring their safety is important not just for the economy but also for civilian safety. States are expected to follow these directives to improve the security of railway infrastructure. Third, the center has a role in education, particularly in promoting the use of mother tongues. States are directed to provide facilities for teaching children from linguistic minority groups in their first language during primary education. This is vital for preserving cultural identities and ensuring that children receive an education that is more accessible to them. Lastly, the center can demand that states develop and carry out specific programs aimed at improving the welfare of scheduled tribes. Scheduled tribes are socially and economically disadvantaged groups, and these schemes are designed to uplift their living standards and provide better opportunities through various developmental initiatives. When the central government issues these directions, they do hold significant authority. Article 365 allows the center to enforce its directives. If a state fails to comply with these instructions, the central government can take action, which could even lead to the imposition of precedence rule in extreme cases. This legal framework ensures that the states align their policies with national interests and maintain a cohesive approach to governance. In summary, while states enjoy a degree of autonomy, the central government plays a crucial role in guiding them during significant national tasks, especially concerning communication, transportation, education, and tribal welfare. These measures are designed to ensure that all states contribute to the country's overall development and security. Mutual delegation of functions in Indian polity. In India, the distribution of powers between the central or union government and the state governments is quite strict, especially when it comes to making laws. This means that the central government cannot hand over its lawmaking powers to the states. Similarly, a single state cannot ask the parliament, the central legislative body, to create a law on matters that are exclusively under state control. This clear separation is outlined in the Constitution of India, particularly in the division of subjects between the union and state lists as per Articles 246 to 254. When it comes to executive power, which involves putting laws into action, it generally aligns with the distribution of legislative powers. However, sometimes this rigid separation can lead to disputes and conflicts between the central and state governments. To resolve potential deadlocks, the Constitution allows for something called intergovernment delegation of executive functions. According to this system, the President of India can, with the agreement of the state government, assign some of the central government's executive duties to that state government. On the flip side, the governor of a state can also pass on some state executive responsibilities to the central government, provided there is agreement from the central side. This process of sharing executive functions can occur in two ways, either conditionally or unconditionally. In some cases, the Constitution allows for the transfer of executive functions of the central government to a state without the state's explicit consent. However, this delegation happens through a law passed by the Parliament rather than directly by the President. Under Article 246, Parliament can create laws on subjects listed in the Union list that may delegate powers or responsibilities to states without needing their approval. It is important to note that while the central government can use both methods of delegation, by mutual agreement or through legislation, states are limited to using only the first method, which is through agreement. This distinction showcases the hierarchical nature of governance in India. Overall, the mutual delegation of functions is designed to promote cooperation and effective governance between the center and states, allowing them to work together for the benefit of citizens. the provisions for delegation help reduce rigidity and enhance administrative efficiency, ensuring that both levels of government can respond more effectively to the needs of the people. Cooperation between the centre and states. The Constitution of India includes important rules to ensure that the central government, also known as the centre, and the state governments work together effectively. This cooperation is vital for maintaining harmony and addressing common issues that affect both levels of government. Here are some key points regarding this cooperation. First, the Constitution gives the Parliament the power to resolve disputes related to the sharing and management of water from rivers that cross state borders. This is crucial since many rivers often flow through multiple states, leading to potential conflicts over water resources. The Parliament can step in to help settle these disagreements through laws and provisions that are designed specifically for this purpose. Second, according to Article 263 of the Constitution, the President of India can create an interstate council. This council is meant for discussion and investigation of issues that are significant to both the centre and the states. The establishment of such a council promotes dialogue and understanding among the different levels of government. An interstate council was formed in 1990, and since then, it has served as a platform for exchanging ideas and finding collective solutions to various challenges state governments face. Another important aspect of cooperation is the principle of full faith and credit. This means that any public acts, records, and legal proceedings recognized by the centre must also be respected by all the states in India. Essentially, this promotes uniformity and trust across the nation, ensuring that legal matters are handled consistently regardless of the state involved. Furthermore, the Constitution includes provisions for the free movement of trade and commerce between states. Parliament has the authority to set up an appropriate body to enforce these rules and ensure that trade flows smoothly before state borders. However, it is notable that, as of now, no such authority has been officially appointed, highlighting an area where cooperation can still be improved. In summary, the Constitution provides a framework for cooperation between the centre and the states, promoting dialogue, addressing conflicts, and ensuring legal uniformity. Articles like 263, along with the principles of full faith and credit, play a significant role in maintaining the cooperative spirit that is essential for India's governance. As the country continues to grow and develop, enhancing this collaboration will be increasingly important for tackling the complex challenges ahead. All India services in India. In India, there are different types of public services for managing the administration at both the national and state levels. These are known as central services and state services. In addition to these, India has a unique set of public services called All India Services. The three main All India services are the Indian Administrative Service, IS, the Indian Police Service, IPS, and the Indian Forest Service, IFOS. Members of these All India services hold important positions in both the central government and state governments. They often switch between these two roles throughout their careers. Although they are ultimately controlled by the central government, the state governments have significant immediate control over their activities. The central government is responsible for their recruitment and training, ensuring that they meet a consistent standard. Historically, the Indian Civil Service, ICS, was the primary civil service before India gained independence in 1947. After independence, the IS replaced it, while the Indian Police, IP, was replaced by the IPS. In 1966, the Indian Forest Service was created as the third All India service. These services are recognized by the Constitution of India, specifically under Article 312. Article 312 of the Constitution empowers Parliament to create new All India services, provided there is a resolution from the Rajya Sabha, the upper house of Parliament. This means that additional All India services can be established based on the needs of Ghanaians. One of the important features of All India services is that they maintain a uniform structure throughout the country. Despite being assigned in different states, members of these services share the same rights, status, and pay scales, promoting equality and consistency across various states. While the existence of All India services might seem to limit the independence of state governments, they offer several advantages that justify their role. Firstly, they help maintain a high standard of administration both at the center and in the states. Secondly, they ensure that administrative practices remain consistent across the country. Lastly, they promote collaboration and coordination between the central government and the states on issues of mutual interest. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a key figure in drafting the Indian Constitution, highlighted the importance of having a dual system of public services in a federal structure. He argued that just as there are federal and state civil services in other federations, India should also have a dual service system. However, he noted that India's All India services are crucial for filling strategic posts that require highly skilled civil servants to ensure a standard of administration that is consistent across the Union. In summary, All India services play a vital role in India's governance structure, bridging the central and state governments. They are designed to maintain administrative standards and ensure uniformity, while also facilitating cooperation between different levels of government. This unique structure is a reflection of India's federal system, aiming to balance state autonomy with the need for coordinated administration nationwide. Public Service Commissions in India. Public service commissions play a vital role in the recruitment processes for government jobs in India. They ensure that the selection of candidates for public services is conducted fairly and competently. The relationship between the central government and state governments in regard to public service commissions is outlined in various constitutional articles and provisions. Firstly, while the governor of a state is responsible for appointing the chairman and members of a state public service commission, there is a crucial point regarding their removal. According to Article 317 of the Indian Constitution, these officials can only be removed by the President of India. This structure is set to maintain a level of independence for public service commissions from both state and central political influences, ensuring that their operations remain impartial. Additionally, the Parliament has the authority to create a Joint State Public Service Commission, JSPSC, if two or more states express the need for such a body. This is initiated through a request from the respective state legislatures. The appointment of the chairman and members of the JSPSC is the prerogative of the President, as per Article 315 of the Constitution. This provision facilitates cooperation among states and allows them to share resources and expertise when conducting recruitment for various public services. The Union Public Service Commission, UPSC, the central body responsible for recruiting candidates for various government positions at the national level, can also assist state governments. When a state governor requests support from the UPSC, and it is approved by the President, the UPSC can provide necessary services. This can be useful in scenarios where a state may require help to fill positions that require specific qualifications, ensuring that candidates are selected based on merit and competency. Moreover, the UPSC can aid states that join forces for joint recruitment initiatives, especially when there is a need for candidates with special qualifications. This collaborative effort is beneficial for optimizing the recruitment process and maintaining a high standard of candidates selected for public service roles. In summary, the framework governing public service commissions reflects a well-structured system of cooperation between the central and state governments in India. With constitutional provisions ensuring independence and collaboration, public service commissions work to uphold the principles of fairness, transparency, and efficiency in filling important positions within the government. Understanding Articles 315 to 317 provides insight into how these bodies operate and their importance in maintaining good governance in India. Integrated judicial system in India. India follows a unique system when it comes to its legal framework. Unlike many countries with two separate systems for administering justice, India has established an integrated judicial system. This means that there is a single system of courts operating across the country, ensuring that justice is applied uniformly. At the top of this judicial hierarchy is the Supreme Court of India. It serves as the highest court and has the ultimate authority to interpret the constitution and laws of the country. Below the Supreme Court are the high courts of the states. Each state has its own high court, but they work under the overall framework set by the Supreme Court. This integrated system is designed to enforce both central laws, those made by the Parliament of India, and state laws, those made by state legislatures. It helps avoid confusion and inconsistency in legal procedures. Articles like Article 141 of the Indian Constitution establish that the law declared by the Supreme Court is binding on all courts within the territory of India. This ensures that everyone, regardless of their location, follows the same laws. The appointment of judges to the high courts is an important process. Judges are appointed by the President of India, but this appointment is done in consultation with the Chief Justice of India and the Governor of the respective state. This collaborative approach aims to ensure that qualified individuals occupy these important judicial positions. Additionally, the President has the authority to transfer and remove judges from the high courts, ensuring that accountability and professionalism are maintained within the judiciary. Furthermore, the Indian Parliament has the power to establish a common high court for two or more states. This is seen in cases like Maharashtra and Goa sharing a common high court, or Punjab and Haryana having a joint high court. Such arrangements can help streamline the judicial process in regions with close geographical and cultural ties. In conclusion, the integrated judicial system in India ensures that the country's laws are administered in a coherent and efficient manner. With the Supreme Court at the helm and high courts supporting it, the judiciary plays a crucial role in upholding justice and the rule of law across India. The relevant articles of the Constitution, such as Articles 141 and 217, provide the legal basis for this integrated approach, ensuring that justice remains a universal right for all citizens. Relations during emergencies in India. In India, the Constitution provides for certain exceptional situations known as emergencies, which can alter the normal functioning of the government at both the national and state levels. These emergencies are defined in different articles of the Constitution, mainly Articles 352, 356, and 360. National Emergency, Article 352. When a national emergency is declared, the central government gains significant powers. According to Article 352, the central government can issue directives to state governments on almost any matter. This means that during such an emergency, the central authorities have complete control over the state governments. Importantly, although the state governments are not completely suspended, they must comply with the directives of the center. This essentially means that the power dynamics shift toward the central government, allowing it to make decisions that significantly impact state governance and administration. President's Rule, Article 356. In situations where a state is experiencing political instability or failure to follow the Constitution, the President can impose President's Rule under Article 356. During this time, the President assumes the responsibilities of the state government, taking over the functions normally carried out by the Chief Minister and the State Cabinet. This also involves exercising powers that would typically belong to the Governor or other executive authorities within the state. While the State Assembly may be dissolved, the state does not cease to exist, Rather, it operates under the direct control of the President, effectively granting the center greater operational power over the state's administration. Financial Emergency, Article 360. Article 360 deals with financial emergencies. When a financial emergency is declared, the central government can take several measures to restore the economic stability of the country. One of the key powers during such an emergency allows the center to instruct state governments to adhere to financial propriety and efficiency. This includes directing states to cut down on unnecessary expenditures and even reduce salaries for state employees. The intent behind this provision is to ensure that the financial interests of the nation are preserved and that states follow prudent financial management practices. In summary, during emergencies, the relationship between the central government and the state governments undergoes significant changes. The Constitution empowers the center to exert control over states to maintain order, stability, and financial discipline. However, it is essential to note that these powers are not intended to be permanent, they are meant to remedy exceptional situations in a structured and constitutional manner. The Indian Constitution has several important rules that allow the central government to oversee the state governments. These rules are designed to maintain the unity of the country and ensure that states operate according to the Constitution. One of these key rules is Article 355. This article outlines two major responsibilities for the central government. First, it requires the center to protect every state from external threats, such as invasion from other countries, and internal problems like civil unrest or riots. Second, it ensures that the government of each state functions according to the Constitution. This means that state governments can't act in a manner that goes against the principles of democracy and the laws laid out in the Constitution. Another significant aspect of state governance involves the governor, who is the representative of the central government in each state. The President of India appoints the governor, and he or she remains in office based on the discretion of the President. This means that the President can choose to remove the governor if needed. The governor has a dual role. Not only are they the ceremonial head of the state, but they also act as an agent of the center. They are responsible for keeping the central government informed about the happenings in the state, submitting regular reports regarding the administration and any significant events. In addition to that, every state has an election commissioner who oversees the conduct of elections within the state. While the governor appoints the state election commissioner, this official can only be removed by the President. This setup underscores the central government's control over the state's election machinery, ensuring that elections adhere to the norms of fairness and transparency as guided by the Constitution. These provisions underline the federal structure of India, where the center has specific powers to maintain order, ensure constitutional compliance, and oversee state administrations when necessary. The division of powers and responsibilities is essential for maintaining democracy in a vast country like India, where diverse states have varying needs and challenges. The balance between state and central powers is outlined in various articles of the Constitution, reinforcing the idea that while states have their own governance, they must still operate under the overarching framework set by the Constitution. Extra-constitutional devices in Indian governance. In addition to the rules and systems set out in the Indian Constitution, there are several extra-constitutional devices that help enhance cooperation and coordination between the central government and the state governments. These additional tools are important to ensure that both levels of government can work together effectively on various issues. One of the main types of extra-constitutional devices is advisory bodies, which are groups formed to provide expert advice and recommendations on different areas of governance. For instance, the Niti Aayog, which replaced the old Planning Commission, focuses on planning and sustainable development in the country. Other significant advisory bodies include the National Integration Council, which works to strengthen unity in diversity, and various councils related to health, local government, and education, like the Central Council of Health and Family Welfare and the University Grants Commission. There are also regional councils aimed specifically at addressing the unique challenges faced by different parts of the country, such as the Northeastern Council and zonal councils. These councils help ensure that the needs of specific areas are recognized and addressed at the national level. Additionally, councils related to specific professions, such as the Central Council of Indian Medicine and the Central Council of Homeopathy, work to enhance the quality and standards in these fields. Apart from these advisory bodies, there are various important conferences held regularly to facilitate discussions and decision-making between the central and state governments. These conferences focus on critical issues affecting governance and policy in India. The Governors' Conference, which is chaired by the President of India, allows state governors to share insights and challenges. Similarly, the Chief Ministers' Conference, led by the Prime Minister, serves as a platform for chief ministers to discuss a range of matters concerning state governance and central support. Other noteworthy conferences include those for chief secretaries, inspector generals of police, chief justices, vice chancellors of universities, home ministers, and law ministers, each addressing specific areas of governance and law. For instance, the Conference of Chief Justices allows the highest judiciary members to discuss judicial matters, thereby impacting the legal system across states. While these extra-constitutional devices do not have a grounding in specific articles of the Indian Constitution, they play a crucial role in ensuring better communication and coordination in the country's governance framework. This cooperation is vital for the successful implementation of laws and policies designed to serve the interests of citizens across India. The Constitution lays the foundation for cooperative federalism, underscoring the importance of collaboration between the centre and states, particularly as outlined in Articles 246 to 256. These articles discuss the distribution of powers and responsibilities between the central and state legislatures. Thus, while the extra-constitutional devices are not explicitly mentioned in the Constitution, they contribute to the practical realization of cooperative federalism that the framers envisaged. Financial relations in India. Articles 268 to 293 of Part 12 of the Indian Constitution focus on the financial relationships between the central government and the state governments. Understanding these articles is essential for grasping how financial resources are allocated and managed between different levels of government in India. Starting with Article 268, it specifies that certain taxes, like the estate duty and custom duties, can be collected by the centre but are meant for the states. Article 269 identifies taxes that are levied by the centre but distributed among the states. This is significant because it establishes that while the central government may impose taxes, a portion of the revenue must be shared with states, which helps them fund their own public services and initiatives. Moving forward, Articles 270 and 271 discuss the distribution of income tax revenues. Article 270 details that income tax collected from individuals and businesses must be shared between the centre and the states, while Article 271 allows the central government to impose surcharges on income tax for its own purposes, which must be considered when assessing states' share of the income tax. Article 272 allows the Parliament to make laws about taxes that can be imposed by both the centre and the states concurrently. This shows the flexibility in the financial framework of India, enabling both layers of government to respond to the economic conditions of the country together. Articles 273 to 280 create provisions for grants in aid to states from the central government. Under these articles, not only can states receive funds, but they can also ask for financial support based on their needs. These grants help in addressing uneven development and financial requirements across the states. In addition to these articles, the Finance Commission plays a crucial role as outlined in Article 280. This body is set up every 5 years to assess the financial position of the states and recommend ways to distribute financial resources from the center to the states. The recommendations made by the Finance Commission are significant in ensuring fairness and financial stability across various regions of India. Furthermore, Articles 281 and 282 allow the President and the Parliament to legislate on grants and financial support to states for specific projects or needs. This underscores the collaborative nature of financial management between different tiers of government. The financial relation framework laid out by these articles ensures that there is a balance in the distribution of resources, taking into consideration factors such as economic disparity, population, and fiscal capacity of states. It establishes a complex yet organized mechanism to build a cooperative federal structure where both the center and states have roles to play in the national economy. Overall, understanding the financial relations articulated in Articles 268 to 293 is vital for comprehending how India's diverse and multi-layered governance interacts financially. The Constitution provides a robust legal foundation to ensure that resources are allocated fairly and that each state has the financial means to govern effectively while maintaining overall national cohesion. Allocation of taxing powers in India. In India, the Constitution outlines how the power to tax is divided between the central government, often referred to as the centre, and the individual state governments. This division helps maintain a balance of financial power across the country. According to the Constitution, Parliament has the exclusive right to impose taxes on matters listed in the Union List. There are currently 13 subjects in this list, which mainly cover essential areas such as defense, foreign affairs, and atomic energy. Meanwhile, state legislatures can exclusively levy taxes on matters in the state list, which contains 18 subjects, including land revenue, police, and agriculture. Notably, the concurrent list, which contains subjects that both the centre and states can legislate on, does not include any tax-related entries. However, an important change came with the 101st Amendment Act in 2016. This amendment was significant because it introduced a special provision for the Goods and Services Tax, GST, allowing both Parliament and state legislatures to have concurrent powers to create laws regulating GST. This move aimed to unify the indirect tax system across India, making it simpler and more efficient for businesses and consumers. The Constitution delegates the residuary power of taxation, meaning the power to impose taxes not specifically mentioned in any of the three lists, to Parliament. This has allowed the centre to impose various taxes like wealth tax, gift tax, and expenditure tax. It's also important to note that while the Constitution separates the power to levy a tax from the power to collect and distribute tax revenue, there are clear guidelines on how these functions interplay. For instance, the income tax is levied and collected by the centre, but the revenue is distributed among both the centre and states as per norms established in economic planning. States also have certain restrictions when it comes to imposing taxes. For example, a state can tax professions, trades, and employment, but the total tax on an individual cannot exceed 2,500 rupee per year. Additionally, states cannot impose taxes on goods or services supplied from outside their jurisdiction, nor can they tax goods brought in for export or import. The Parliament holds the authority to set the principles that determine when supplies occur outside a state's jurisdiction or involve cross-border trade. Furthermore, states can impose taxes on electricity sales or consumption. However, they cannot tax electricity that is consumed by the centre or sold to it, especially if the electricity is used for railway operations. If any taxes are to be applied regarding water or electricity handled by a central authority for interstate river management, those state laws must also be reserved for the President's consideration and receive presidential assent before they can come into effect. This structured allocation of taxing powers is essential for maintaining the financial fabric of India. It ensures that both the centre and the states have the necessary resources to fulfill their constitutional obligations while fostering a sense of cooperation between different levels of government. Articles such as Article 246, which outlines the distribution of powers, and Article 246A, which empowers the earning of GST, play a crucial role in this framework, ensuring a balanced approach to taxation in the country. Distribution of tax revenues in India. The distribution of tax revenues between the central government and state governments in India is governed by specific constitutional amendments and articles. The key changes were introduced through the 80th Amendment Act in 2000 and the 101st Amendment Act in 2016. The 80th Amendment Act, 2000. The 80th Amendment was based on recommendations made by the 10th Finance Commission. This amendment aimed to improve how tax revenues are shared between the central and state governments. According to the Finance Commission, 29% of the revenue generated from certain central taxes and duties should be allocated to the states. This sharing of tax revenues is known as the Alternative Scheme of Devolution, and it became effective from 1 April 1996. As a result of this amendment, various central taxes and duties, such as corporation tax and customs duties, are now treated similarly to income tax regarding how they are shared with the states. Income tax refers to taxes on income earned by individuals and businesses, excluding income from agriculture. The 101st Amendment Act, 2016. The 101st Amendment introduced a significant change in India's tax structure by introducing the Goods and Services Tax, GST. This new tax regime allows both the Parliament and state legislatures to create laws that levy GST on all transactions involving the supply of goods and services. The GST replaced multiple indirect taxes previously imposed by both the central and state governments. The goal of the GST is to eliminate the cascading effect of taxes, which is the scenario where tax is paid on tax, thus making products and services more affordable and promoting a unified national market. The amendment integrated various central indirect taxes, which include Central Excise Duty, Additional Excise Duty, Service Tax, Special Additional Duty of Customs, certain other taxes and cesses related to the supply of goods and services. The amendment also merged several state-level taxes such as Value-Added Tax, VAT, Entertainment Tax, except those levied by local bodies, and other local taxes into the GST framework. Moreover, two articles, Article 268-A and Entry 92-C in the Union List, which dealt with service tax, were removed because service tax is now covered under GST. Tax distribution post-amendments. After these two amendments, the framework for distributing tax revenues between the central and state governments is as follows. 1. Taxes levied by the centre but collected by states, Article 268. This includes stamp duties on documents like checks and insurance policies. The revenue from these taxes does not go into the Consolidated Fund of India. Instead, it is directly assigned to the respective states. 2. Taxes levied and collected by the central government but assigned to states, Article 269. This includes taxes on the sale or purchase of goods moving across state borders. The net revenue from these taxes is assigned to the respective states according to guidelines established by the Parliament. 3. Goods and Services Tax, GST, on interstate trade, Article 269-A. GST is levied and collected by the central government during interstate trade or commerce, but the revenue is shared between the centre and the states based on the recommendations made by the GST Council. 4. Taxes levied and collected by the center but shared with states. Article 270. All central taxes and duties that do not fall under the earlier categories are included here. The distribution of revenues collected under these taxes is determined by the President based on the Finance Commission's recommendations. 5. Surcharge for central government. Article 271. The Parliament can impose additional surcharges on certain taxes and duties, with the proceeds going solely to the central government. However, GST is not subject to this surcharge. 6. Taxes exclusive to state governments. States have the authority to collect 18 types of taxes that are exclusively theirs. These include land revenue, agricultural income taxes, excise duties on alcohol, and various other taxes related to services and goods. Conclusion. The amendments significantly reshaped the framework of tax revenue distribution in India, leading to a more structured and equitable sharing between the centre and the states. Understanding these changes is vital for recognizing the financial dynamics of governance in India and how resources are allocated to facilitate development at regional and national levels. The current distribution system aims to enhance fiscal transparency and efficiency while fulfilling the constitutional obligations of governance. Distribution of non-tax revenues in India. In India, the government collects money from various sources that are not taxes. This income is known as non-tax revenue and it plays a significant role in financing government activities and services. Let's take a closer look at how this non-tax revenue is distributed between the central government and state governments. Non-tax revenues of the centre. The central government of India has several main sources of non-tax revenue. These include post and telecommunication services. This refers to the money earned from postal services and telecommunication like telephone and internet services. Railways. The Indian Railways generates significant revenue through ticket sales, freight charges, and other services. Banking. The central government earns money from various banking operations, which may include interest on loans provided by government-owned banks. Broadcasting. This includes revenue from government-owned television and radio services. Coinage and currency. The government also makes money from printing currency and minting coins. Central public sector enterprises. These are government-owned companies that make profits which are given to the central treasury. Escheat and lapse. Escheat refers to property or money that belongs to the government when a person passes away without any legal heirs. Lapse refers to unclaimed property that goes to the government after a certain period. Others. This includes various miscellaneous sources of income. Non-tax revenues of the states. The state governments also have their own sources of non-tax revenue. Here are the major ones. Irrigation. States earn money from charges related to irrigation projects, which include fees for the use of water for agriculture. Forests. The state government generates revenue from forest resources, including timber, resin, and other forest products. Fisheries. Income is derived from fisheries through licenses, fees, and taxes on fish catches. State public sector enterprises. Just like the central government, state governments have their own public sector companies that contribute to revenue. Escheat and lapse. Similar to the rules at the central level, states also benefit from unclaimed properties and money. Others. This covers a variety of other sources like fees from licenses, fines, and penalties. Constitutional context. The distribution of these revenues is grounded in the Indian Constitution. Articles 265 and 266 deal with the subject of taxes and non-tax revenue, respectively. Article 265 states that no tax may be levied or collected without the authority of law, which emphasizes the importance of legally sanctioned means of raising revenue. Article 266 mentions the Consolidated Fund of India for the central government and the Consolidated Fund of the States for state governments. It establishes that all revenues, including non-tax revenues, are to be deposited into these funds, ensuring a structured approach to financial management. Moreover, the Finance Commission plays a significant role in recommending the distribution of financial resources between the central and state governments as per Article 280, ensuring equitable sharing and fiscal responsibility. In summary, non-tax revenue is a crucial element of India's financial system, allowing both the central and state governments to fund necessary services and infrastructure, which ultimately contributes to the growth and development of the nation. Understanding these sources of revenue helps in comprehending how governments operate and maintain public services without relying solely on tax income. Grants in it to the states. In India, the distribution of financial resources between the central government and state governments is an important aspect of governance. Aside from sharing taxes, the Constitution also allows the central government to provide financial assistance to states through grants in aid. These grants help states that are in need of financial support to carry out various responsibilities and projects. There are two main types of grants in aid specified by the Constitution: statutory grants and discretionary grants. Statutory grants. Statutory grants are established under Article 275 of the Indian Constitution. This article gives the Parliament the authority to provide financial aid to certain states that require assistance. However, not all states qualify for these grants. The specific amounts of the grants can vary for different states, acknowledging that not every state faces the same financial challenges. The funds for these statutory grants are taken from the Consolidated Fund of India, which is a central fund held by the government. Each year, these grants are approved based on the recommendations of the Finance Commission, a body that assesses the financial needs of the states and suggests the distribution of funds. In addition to general financial aid, Article 275 also allows for specific grants aimed at improving the welfare of scheduled tribes and enhancing the administration of scheduled areas, which may include regions like Assam. Discretionary grants. Discretionary grants, on the other hand, are outlined in Article 282 of the Constitution. This article gives both the central and state governments the power to provide grants for any public purpose, even if the purpose doesn't fall strictly within their legislative powers. While the central government can allocate these grants to states, it is important to note that these grants are not mandatory. The central government has the discretion to decide when and how much to give. The reasons for creating discretionary grants are twofold. First, they offer financial assistance to states to help them achieve their development goals as outlined in their plans. Second, these grants give the central government the ability to influence and steer state actions to align with national objectives and development plans. Other grants. In addition to statutory and discretionary grants, the Constitution made provisions for a third type aimed at addressing specific needs for a limited time. For example, a grant was introduced in the early years following the Constitution's establishment to compensate the states of Assam, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal for a loss in export duties related to jute and jute products. This temporary support was to be provided for 10 years from the start of the Constitution. Like the other grants, these funds were also charged to the Consolidated Fund of India and were given out based on the Finance Commission's recommendations. By providing different types of grants, the Indian Constitution plays a significant role in ensuring that states can meet their financial needs and promote welfare among their populations, especially for marginalized groups. Understanding these provisions is crucial for grasping how fiscal responsibilities are shared between different levels of government in India. Goods and Services Tax Council. To manage the Goods and Services Tax (GST) effectively, the Indian government needs cooperation between the central, national government and the state governments. To promote this cooperation, the Indian Parliament passed the 101st Amendment Act in 2016, which led to the creation of the Goods and Services Tax Council, commonly known as the GST Council. This council was established under Article 279-A of the Indian Constitution, which gives the President the authority to form the council through an official order. The GST Council serves as a collaborative platform where representatives from both the central and state governments work together. The main purpose of the Council is to provide recommendations on several important matters related to GST, ensuring that the tax system is efficient and fair. One of the key responsibilities of the GST Council is to identify which taxes, surcharges, and cesses that are currently collected by the central government, state governments, and local bodies will be combined into the GST system. This integration aims to simplify the tax structure and eliminate the complexity of multiple taxes. Additionally, the GST Council decides which goods and services should be included in the GST and which ones should be exempted from it. This is vital to ensure that essential items like food and healthcare remain affordable for the general public. The Council also works on developing model GST laws. This includes establishing principles for imposing GST, sharing the tax collected on interstate transactions, and determining the rules regarding the place of supply of goods and services. These guidelines help maintain consistency and clarity in the tax framework across different states. Another important function of the GST Council is to set a threshold limit for revenue. This means that small businesses whose turnover is below a specified amount could be exempted from paying GST, reducing the tax burden on smaller enterprises and encouraging entrepreneurship. Moreover, the GST Council is involved in deciding the tax rates for different categories of goods and services, including setting minimum, floor, rates to maintain stability in the tax system. In case of emergencies, like natural disasters, the Council can recommend special tax rates for a specific time to generate extra resources to manage the situation effectively. Overall, the GST Council plays a crucial role in ensuring that the GST system functions smoothly in India, fostering coordination between different levels of government and providing a structured approach to taxation. This cooperative framework is essential for creating a unified national market and simplifying the tax compliance process for businesses and consumers alike. The Finance Commission is an important body established under Article 280 of the Indian Constitution. It acts like a judicial entity and is appointed by the President of India every 5 years, although it may be set up earlier if the need arises. The main purpose of the Finance Commission is to provide recommendations to the President about how financial resources should be distributed between the central government and the individual states. One of the key functions of the Finance Commission is to determine how the net income from taxes should be shared. This involves deciding what portion of tax revenue goes to the central government and what portion is allocated to the states. In addition to this, it also figures out how the tax revenue should be divided among the different states, ensuring a fair distribution. Another important task of the Finance Commission is to recommend the principles that should guide the financial support or grants provided by the central government to the states. This financial aid comes from the Consolidated Fund of India, which is a major account that holds all public money. The Commission also looks into ways to boost the resources of the state governments, particularly for local bodies like panchayats, village councils, and municipalities, based on what the State Finance Commission has suggested. Moreover, the Finance Commission can also consider any other financial matters that the President may refer to it. This flexibility allows the Commission to address various financial issues to ensure good fiscal health in the country. Historically, until 1960, the Finance Commission also played a role in recommending payments to states such as Assam, Bihar, Odisha, and West Bengal. these payments were in lieu of the share of export duty on jute and jute products, reflecting the Commission's long-standing involvement in addressing the financial needs of different regions. The Constitution sees the Finance Commission as a key element in maintaining fiscal federalism in India. Fiscal federalism refers to the financial relationship between different levels of government, aiming for a balanced responsibility between the centre and the states in terms of financial powers and resources. The recommendations made by the Finance Commission are important for ensuring that states receive a fair share of financial resources, which is essential for their development and governance. Overall, the Finance Commission plays a crucial role in shaping economic policy and achieving equitable financial allocation throughout the country, thus supporting the framework of cooperative federalism in India. Protection of states' interests in financial matters. The Constitution of India includes specific rules to ensure that the financial interests of the states are safeguarded when the Parliament considers various bills. This means that certain types of financial legislation cannot be introduced in Parliament unless the President of India gives his or her approval first. These bills include those that create or modify any tax or duty that affects the states, change the definition of agricultural income as it relates to Indian income tax regulations, alter the rules regarding how financial resources are allocated to the states, introduce a surcharge on any specific tax or duty for central government purposes. When we talk about a tax or duty in which states are interested, we are referring to taxes or duties where either all or part of the revenue is assigned to a particular state. This could mean that the state receives some money from these taxes or that the taxes are directly linked to the financial support from the central government's consolidated fund. The term net proceeds is crucial here. It refers to the total income generated from a tax or duty after deducting the costs involved in collecting that revenue. The Comptroller and Auditor General of India, CAG, plays an important role in this process, as it is their responsibility to determine and certify what those net proceeds are for each area. The certification given by the CAG is considered final and binding, ensuring that there is no dispute about the amounts involved. These provisions are grounded in the Constitution, specifically within articles like Article 268, which pertains to taxes levied by the Union but collected and appropriated by the states. Article 269 deals with taxes levied and collected by the Union but assigned to the states, further emphasizing the importance of considering the state's financial interest in legislative processes. By having these rules in place, the Constitution aims to create a balanced financial relationship between the central and state governments. This ensures that states are not unfairly burdened by central taxes and can receive appropriate funds to support their development and initiatives. In sum, these constitutional protections are vital for maintaining fair financial practices in India, ensuring that both the central government and the states cooperate effectively in managing the country's resources. Borrowing powers of the centre and states in India. The Indian Constitution has specific guidelines about how the central government and state governments can borrow money. Understanding these rules is essential for grasping how financial matters are managed in the country. Firstly, the central government has the power to borrow money, both within India and from foreign sources. This borrowing can be secured by the Consolidated Fund of India, which is essentially the main account where all government revenues and expenditures are tracked. However, there is a key point to remember: the central government can only borrow money up to certain limits set by the Indian Parliament. Even though this provision exists, it's important to note that, as of now, Parliament has not created a law that clearly defines these borrowing limits. On the other hand, state governments have the authority to borrow money, but they are restricted to borrowing only within India. Like the central government, they can use their own consolidated fund of the state as security for these loans. Each state has its own legislature that determines the borrowing limits for that state. This means that while state governments can raise money through loans, they must adhere to the boundaries set by their local legislative bodies. In addition to borrowing, the central government can also provide financial assistance to state governments. This is done by making loans to states or by guaranteeing loans that states take from other sources. The money for these loans from the central government is also drawn from the Consolidated Fund of India. However, it is essential for states to seek permission from the central government before they can take on new loans if they have not yet repaid any previous loans obtained from the centre or if the centre has guaranteed those loans. This safeguard helps maintain financial discipline and ensures that states do not get into undue debt. These provisions are anchored in various articles of the Constitution. For example, Article 292 covers the borrowing powers of the central government, while Article 293 addresses the borrowing powers of state governments. Article 293, in particular, stipulates that states cannot raise loans at their discretion if they have outstanding loans from the central government that need to be cleared first. In conclusion, the borrowing powers of the centre and the states in India are clearly defined in the Constitution. These rules help to ensure financial accountability and stability at both the central and state levels. It is essential for the responsible management of funds, as borrowing without restraint can lead to significant debt and fiscal issues for both levels of government. Understanding these provisions is crucial for anyone interested in Indian governance and public finance. Intergovernmental tax immunities in India. In India, like in many other countries with a federal structure, there are specific rules about taxes between the central government and state governments. These rules help ensure that one level of government does not unfairly tax the other. Let's look into how these immunities work according to the Indian Constitution. Exemption of central property from state taxation. According to the Indian Constitution, the property owned by the central government is exempt from any taxes imposed by state governments or local authorities, which include municipalities, district councils, and panchayats, local governments. This means that states cannot collect taxes on properties that belong to the central government. However, it's important to note that the Parliament of India can decide to remove this immunity if it chooses to. The term property is broadly defined. It includes not just land and buildings, but also movable assets like vehicles, shares, debts, and other possessions with monetary value. It doesn't matter if the property is used for official purposes, like in the case of the armed forces, or for commercial activities. One significant exception to this rule is that companies and corporations created by the central government are not immune from paying local taxes or state taxes. This is because these entities are considered separate legal identities under the law. Exemption of state property or income from central taxation. On the flip side, properties and incomes owned by state governments are also protected from taxation by the central government. This includes revenue generated from activities considered sovereign, like running the police or military, and from commercial operations. However, the Parliament has the authority to levy taxes on a state's commercial activities if it decides to do so. Interestingly, if there's a particular business or trade that the Parliament believes is part of the normal functions of a state government, it can declare such activities exempt from taxes. Moreover, local authorities within a state, such as local councils, do not enjoy the same immunity from central taxation. Similarly, properties and income from state-owned companies or corporations can be taxed by the central government. Important legal clarifications. In 1963, the Supreme Court provided clarity regarding these immunities in an advisory opinion. It stated that the privileges granted to states concerning central taxation do not apply to customs duties or excise duties. This means that although a state can benefit from its income not being taxed by the center, it still has to pay customs duties on imported goods or excise duties on products manufactured within its borders. Relevant constitutional articles. These provisions regarding tax immunity are primarily highlighted in Articles 285 and 286 of the Indian Constitution. Article 285 ensures that the property of the Union is not subject to state taxes, while Article 286 lays down the rules regarding the prohibition of state taxes on certain goods and services. In summary, the concept of intergovernmental tax immunities is crucial for maintaining a balance between the central and state governments in India. It ensures that both levels of government have their own sources of income without infringing on each other's rights. Understanding these provisions is essential for grasping the financial framework within which Indian federalism operates. In India, the relationship between the central government and state governments concerning finances changes during emergencies. There are two main types of emergencies that can affect how money is managed: national emergencies and financial emergencies. When a national emergency is declared under Article 352 of the Indian Constitution, the President has special powers. This means the President can change how money collected as revenue is shared between the central government and the states. Essentially, the President can reduce or even stop the financial support that the central government sends to the states. This might include shared taxes and grants that help states manage their finances. These changes remain in place until the end of the financial year in which the emergency declaration ends. On the other hand, when a financial emergency is proclaimed under Article 360, the central government gets specific powers over financial matters in the states. During a financial emergency, the central government can instruct the states in several important ways. First, it may direct the states to follow certain financial rules to ensure they handle their finances properly. Secondly, the central government can order states to cut down on salaries and allowances for government employees at all levels. Finally, the central government can mandate that all money-related bills, which are proposals concerning state finances, must be sent to the President for approval before the states can act on them. These provisions ensure that during times of crisis, the financial stability of the country is prioritized, and the central government can take the necessary steps to manage national resources effectively. The constitutional articles governing these actions provide a framework to maintain order and control in financial matters even when unexpected events disrupt normal functioning. Understanding these emergency powers is crucial as it clarifies how the balance of power and financial responsibilities can shift in times of national or financial crisis. Center-state relations in India. Before 1967, the relationship between the central government and state governments in India was mostly harmonious. This was largely because one political party, the Congress Party, was in power at both the national and state levels. However, everything changed after the elections in 1967 when the Congress Party lost its dominance in 9 states. As a result, the central government's strength also reduced. This shift marked the beginning of a new chapter in the dynamics between the center and the states. With the rise of non-Congress governments in various states, there was a growing concern about the increasing centralization of power by the central government. The new leaders in these states felt that the central authority was overstepping its boundaries and infringing upon the rights and autonomy of the states. They started to advocate for greater state autonomy, which refers to the ability of states to govern themselves with more independence from the central government. This agitation for more autonomy included demands for enhanced powers and financial resources for the states. Many state governments argued that they needed more authority to make decisions on local matters and manage their own resources effectively. The tension between state and central authorities increased as this demand became more vocal and organized. Several articles of the Indian Constitution are relevant when discussing center-state relations. Article 245, for instance, gives the Parliament the power to make laws for the whole or any part of India, which can sometimes lead to conflicts with state laws. Similarly, Article 254 states that if there is a conflict between a central law and a state law on the same subject, the central law prevails unless the state law has received the President's assent. In addition to these articles, the Constitution also offers mechanisms for resolving disputes between the centre and the states. For instance, Article 263 allows the President to establish an interstate council to discuss and resolve matters of common interest between states and the centre. The increased call for state autonomy and the central government's response to these demands have led to notable tensions over the years. These tensions reflect the ongoing struggle for power distribution in India's federal system, highlighting the delicate balance that must be maintained for effective governance. Understanding these dynamics not only gives insight into Indian politics but also illustrates the challenges of federalism in a diverse country like India. Tension areas in center-state relations. In India, the relationship between the central government, centre, and state governments often encounters challenges and conflicts. This ongoing tension is caused by several key issues that can affect how governance functions at different levels. Understanding these challenges is crucial for improving relations between the centre and the states. One major area of concern is the appointment and dismissal of governors. The governor is appointed by the President of India and often becomes a point of disagreement, especially if there are differences in political opinions between the state government and the centre. The Constitution of India Article 153 states that there shall be a governor for each state, but there are no strict rules on how governors should carry out their roles, leading to perceptions of bias and partisan behavior. Governors sometimes take actions that appear to favor the centre over the interests of the states. Their role can sometimes seem discriminatory or politically motivated, which leads to conflicts. Moreover, the imposition of precedence rule under Article 356 of the Constitution allows the centre to assume direct control of a state's government under specific conditions. Unfortunately, this power can be misused for political gains, which increases tensions further. Another point of friction stems from how central forces are deployed in states. The central government may send troops or other security forces to manage law and order situations. While this can be necessary in certain circumstances, it often leads to resentment from state governments who may feel their authority is undermined. Additionally, when state bills are reserved for presidential consideration, it creates further anxiety. This is done under Article 200 of the Constitution, which allows governors to send certain bills to the President, but states often view this as an overreach by the centre. There are also concerns regarding the distribution of financial resources. The central government sometimes discriminates against certain states in their financial allocations, which can lead to feelings of neglect or unfair treatment. The planning process also adds to the complications. The Planning Commission, which existed until 2015, often had a significant say in approving state projects. Many states criticized it for central overreach and a lack of proper understanding of local needs. After the Planning Commission was replaced by the Niti Aayog, there have been changes, but tensions remain regarding how plans and initiatives are formulated and approved. Another contentious issue involves the management of all India services like the Indian Administrative Service, IS, Indian Police Service, IPS, and Indian Forest Service, IFOS. The centre has significant influence over these services, which leads to disputes over authority and responsibility between states and the centre. The rise of electronic media has also introduced new challenges. The centre and state governments often use media for political purposes, leading to biased narratives and contributing to tensions. Furthermore, The appointment of inquiry commissions against chief ministers can raise concerns about misuse of power by the centre. This can negatively impact the credibility and authority of state leaders. When it comes to finances, the sharing of resources between the centre and states is often a source of contention. Articles 280 and 275 of the Constitution lay out the framework for the distribution of taxes and grants, but disputes often arise over how these allocations are managed. The centre is also seen as encroaching on the state list, which outlines areas where states have exclusive legislative power. The management of centrally sponsored schemes can further complicate matters, as states sometimes feel pressured to implement these initiatives without adequate support. Finally, the functioning of central agencies like the Central Bureau of Investigation, CBI, and the Enforcement Directorate, ED, raises alarms. States often accuse these agencies of being used for political purposes, resulting in mistrust and conflict. The issues in centre-state relations have been under discussion since the mid-1960s, but they continue to be relevant today. By addressing these tensions thoughtfully, India can work towards a more harmonious and coordinated approach to governance. Understanding the constitutional articles and laws around these issues helps clarify the complexities involved and the need for continuous dialogue between the centre and the states. Administrative Reforms Commission. In India, the government set up the first Administrative Reforms Commission, ARC, in 1966 to look into how government administration could be improved. This commission consisted of 6 members and was led by Morarji Desai, who was later succeeded by K. Hanumanthayya. One of the main tasks of the ARC was to study the relationship between the central government and the state governments, often referred to as centre-state relations. To better understand the issues surrounding centre-state relations, the ARC formed a special team led by M.C. Setalvad. This team's job was to explore various aspects of how the central and state governments interacted with each other. After reviewing the findings of this study team, the ARC compiled its final report, which was submitted to the central government in 1969. In this report, the ARC suggested 22 recommendations aimed at enhancing the relationship between the centre and the states. Among the significant recommendations made by the ARC were the establishment of an interstate council under Article 263 of the Indian Constitution. This article allows the government to create a council aimed at promoting coordination between different states and the centre. Another important suggestion was to appoint governors who have extensive experience in public service and who are non-partisan, meaning they do not favour one political party over another. The ARC also recommended that powers should be delegated as much as possible to the states. This would give states greater control over their own affairs and reduce their reliance on the central government. Additionally, it was suggested that more financial resources should be transferred to the states, enabling them to function more independently. This recommendation was particularly important because many states faced financial difficulties and were often dependent on the centre for funds. Another critical point made by the ARC concerned the use of central armed forces within states. The Commission suggested that these forces should be deployed in the states either upon request from the state governments or as deemed necessary by the central government. Despite the detailed recommendations put forth by the ARC, the central government did not take action on any of these proposals. This lack of action raised concerns about the effectiveness of reform efforts and highlighted the challenges in implementing changes in the complex landscape of Indian politics. Overall, the work of the Administrative Reforms Commission in 1966 provided important insights into the functioning of the Indian political system and continues to be relevant in discussions about centre-state relations and administrative reforms in India. Legal frameworks and constitutional articles, particularly Article 263, remain crucial in shaping the collaborative governance of the central and state administrations in the country. The Rajmannar Committee was set up in 1969 by the Tamil Nadu government, which was led by the Dravida Munnetra Kazhagam (DMK) party. The committee was chaired by Dr. P.V. Rajmannar, and its main aim was to look into the relationship between the central government